This video is dedicated to the Spaceman, Ace Frehley, a force in rock history, whose guitar spoke truths that words alone could not. From the Bronx to stadiums around the world, he defied limits, carved his own path, and left an indelible mark on music and all rock fans. Ace wasn't just a member of KISS. He was the wild spark, the innovator, the one who made every note feel like a promise. He lived loud, unapologetically, and with a fire that will forever resonate. His family shared the news through a statement saying, "We are completely devastated and heartbroken. In his last moments, we were fortunate enough to have been able to surround him with loving, caring, peaceful words, thoughts, prayers, and intentions as he left this earth. We cherish all of his finest memories, his laughter, and celebrate his strength and kindness that he bestowed upon others. The magnitude of his passing is of epic proportions and beyond comprehension. Reflecting on all of his incredible life achievements, Ace's memory will continue to live on forever." Though he's gone, his solos still echo, his spirit still soars, and his legacy will never fade. This is more than a documentary. This is a tribute to a legend and a forever icon. Rock on, Ace, and take that rocket ride. The sound of his guitar playing is unmistakable. The tone, the vibrato, and just the attitude that comes out of the Marshall speakers. It only takes a few seconds, and you know that it is Ace Frehley. In this video here, we're going to talk a little about Ace and his early life, before he ever put the Spaceman makeup on, and try to find out how this rock and roll guitarist came to be, and what drives him, and what caused him to walk away from KISS. He was a New York boy, born and raised in the Bronx. Growing up wasn't easy in his neighborhood. Was he just born to rock? Or did the environment he was raised in have something to do with the guitarist he came to be? I think a little of both. When he auditioned for KISS, Gene, Peter, and Paul knew that Ace was the one almost immediately after only jamming out a few songs. Ace's guitar spoke for him. Ace walked away from KISS, not once but twice, leaving millions of dollars on the table. That had to be tough. But for Ace, it just might have been harder to stay for the fame and fortune and not listen to his heart. It's probably a good thing he did listen, or he might not have been able to live with it. So let's get on with it and kick back and take a look back on Ace Frehley. Paul Daniel Frehley was born April 27, 1951, and raised in the Bronx, New York City. The youngest of three children, he was, in the truest sense, the black sheep of his family. And if you wonder why, all you gotta do is ask him and he'll tell you. Because all I wanted to be was a rock and roll guitar player, and that didn't go over well with his middle-class family. To be a rock and roll guitarist, it has a little more to do with than just playing the guitar. It comes with an attitude that a lot of people just don't understand. Ace joined up in the street gangs early. He had to for protection. He wasn't really into drugs as a teen, but he did drink, and from what he says, quite a bit. Girls were also one of his main focuses. He got the nickname Ace in high school from his friends, who said he was a real ace for his ability to talk to the girls and get dates. Also in his high school years, a guidance counselor encouraged him to get into graphic arts. He later credited guitar playing for saving his life. Although from all accounts, Ace was a pretty good artist in his day, but the guitar was his main focus. Ace bounced around in different bands, honing his skills, but it was in December of 1972 that Ace would answer an ad in a local paper. He had his mom drive him to the audition. He hauled his Marshall half-stack in her car and unloaded it and took it in. He then set up and played with what was to become the band KISS. Out of all the guitar players they listened to that day, Ace was it. But let's take a little deeper look inside of this guy and the band. Let's start off with that first Kiss album. And give credit where credit is due, Gene and Paul were very good songwriters. They had spent the last couple of years sitting around and working on most of them songs. They brought in Peter to play drums. Now Gene and Paul said they were looking for a John Bonham type player. Well, they may have been looking. Even Paul admitted that Peter was the right man for the job. After making a go at it, three-piece, they quickly realized that wasn't going to work. So they put out an ad looking for a guitarist. Enter Ace Frehley. He had his mom drive him to the audition. He unloaded his Marshall amp, chugged a beer, and went up to play. We have to remember here, Ace was a very insecure person, especially about his playing. He admits this now. I know it is hard for some of us to understand, but most all players are like that to some extent. And Ace, by his own admission, was really unsure of himself. They ran through a song a couple of times and then told Ace, join in and play. The song was Deuce, and the rest is history. He just fit, Gene Simmons says. 1 minute we had been one thing, and a minute later, with this guy named Ace Frehley, we became something else, something undeniable, Paul Stanley said. Why? Because of the style of music they played. In the beginning, Kiss was a straight-up rock band, and Ace was a straight-up rock and roll player. Even today, Ace still plays just like he did back in the early 70s. And I am sure some of you are not going to agree with me, but I think the first 3 studio albums were much better than anything else they ever did in the studio. Why? A lot of reasons. But the main one is Ace went in there and played from his heart. He just played what he felt. We know Ace was a self-taught rocker. The first 2 albums were both produced by Richie Wise and Kenny Kerner. But that first album, which by the way, most of the songs on there are still some of the most Kiss notables and were basically put together and ready to record. When working these songs out with the band, Ace simply just played. And Gene said he fit. Okay. The second album, Hotter Than Hell. Again, the same producers, who I think basically just kept things in order on the sessions and let the band play. Remember, Casablanca was just starting out, and Neil Bogart, as always, was trying to make a fast buck. So they probably spent a little more time on this album than the first, but not much. Get in there and rock and get it done. Now, Dressed to Kill, and Neil decides he would produce the album himself, a record executive to produce a rock album. Okay. So again, Kiss probably was basically on their own in the studio and just played from the heart. No major production, just straight up rock and roll. Then came the live album, which was overdubbed quite a bit and produced by Eddie Kramer. Now, Ace was recorded playing on stage, and even when he did overdubs, he was still playing from within himself, also playing what I considered some of the best songs Kiss ever wrote. Now came Destroyer, and enter Bob Ezrin. First off, let me say, Bob Ezrin is a great producer, very talented and musically trained. Ace was nothing more than a self-taught rocker who played from the heart. You getting the picture? All of the members were basically like that, but Ace was different. I think deep inside, he was a rock and roller who, even if he wanted to, could not change. He was the glue that held Kiss together and made them one of the best rock bands ever early in their career, until they took his magic away. Remember, I'm not talking about makeup or stage shows. I'm talking about the music. I became a Kiss fan because of that early music, and I don't believe I was the only one. But for some reason, Gene and Paul decided to let the music change and go more mainstream. And that was a change that Ace and even Peter could not really handle. I think that the Destroyer album and Bob Ezrin was the beginning of the end of what made that band great musically. It took a lot of the heart of Ace Frehley out of the mix. Ace has given Bob Ezrin credit for some of the great music he produced for Kiss and the solos he came up with on the Destroyer album. But if you listen to what little playing Ace did on that album, it does not sound like the Ace we were used to hearing, and in a way, Kiss never did again. You can go and listen to Ace today, and him and whatever his band is sounds great if you are into straight-up rock and roll. Sounds just like he did in the mid-'70s. I would say right around Destroyer is when Ace really started a downward spiral in the band. Of course, Ace had an alcohol problem, and now with all the money and fame, he had a pretty good drug problem going too. Always being the insecure type, and after Destroyer, I'm sure Ezrin telling Ace what to play instead of letting him be himself, and then bringing in studio players didn't help this matter any. Compounded with the fact that Kiss was starting to go ever so slowly off in a different direction musically led to a lot of Ace's problems. Paul and Gene decided to go in a direction that the original Kiss members were not really made for, and to me, the band never was the same again. I think Ace did great solo albums. I really enjoy them. Only a few songs out of all of them were kind of meh. Most were good rock and roll. Sure, he never drawed the crowds that the Kiss band did, but after Ace left, Kiss had to go out of the country to draw crowds like they used to. Ace getting away from Kiss was the best thing for him, in my opinion. That I saw Kiss in the spring of 1974. Outside, during the day, no light show, just 4 guys playing rock and roll. I was in total awe that day of Ace Frehley. His guitar and Peter's pounding is what drove that band in the early years. When Ace took his solos, you knew it. Not taking anything away from Gene and Paul. Like I said, they were both good songwriters, and without their hard work and ideas, they may never have found a guy like Bill Aucoin that led them to the top. But after that, they lost sight of a big part of what made them, the music. Sure, they went on and became wealthy because they took the name, the idea, and the show. But the music has never been the same to me. Kudos to them for being so successful, but kudos to Ace for keeping to his roots and playing great rock and roll. I think Ace was born to rock. He practiced the rock lifestyle long before he put the makeup on. Once in Kiss and they turned him loose, he created some great song with them guys. Once they took that away from him, they took a big piece of the band's overall sound away and were never the same. Ace will always be recognized as one of the great rock guitarists, with or without the makeup on. He's left the drugs and booze alone and seems much more low-keyed, although there is nothing about his playing that is low-keyed. Just put a Les Paul in his hand and plug him into a Marshall and get out of his way. So what are your thoughts on Ace? Please leave me a comment. Give me your thoughts on Ace. I'd like to hear your side of the story too. Thanks for watching.